Hey, welcome to the Fall into Tech podcast, hosted by Jamil Matten and myself, Michael Rodriguez, two Marines turned techies. On this podcast, as you know, we chat with fellow veterans about their journey from military to technology, as well as other tech professionals to help you succeed in tech.
Yeah, that's right. We suggest that you tune in weekly for guest interviews where we discuss specific tech roles, career paths, and tips for succeeding in tech. This week we have Jeff Otano. Thank you for joining us. Jeff is a Marine veteran turned senior software engineer and startup founder. And he also happened to be Fall In Hackathon's previous judge. So, yeah, Jeff, thanks again for joining. We'd like to start things off by asking our guests by asking our guests to tell the listeners a fun fact about themselves. So, um, yeah, we'd love
Yeah,
to hear a fun fact.
totally. Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. Super exciting what you guys are doing. So, I guess quick fun fact. So I used to be a big runner, huge into ultra running, marathons, and then I got taken over by pickleball, which is like the nerdiest thing you could do outside of running. So, yeah, I played probably like 20 hours a week of pickleball. It's my new cardio. So, yeah.
Nice. I've been hearing a lot about pickleball, actually. I've been meaning to try it out. Maybe this is the sign I need.
Yeah, it is the most fun you could do, and you burn an insane amount of calories. So that's really why I do it.
Nice. Yeah, and so Jamil mentioned you're a Marine. So can you just tell us first, I guess, why you joined the Marines and what years you served? What was your military occupation?
Yeah, totally. So I was the first one to join out of my family. So I'm a first generation American, parents Cuban and Colombian, and they were like, "You're going to be a communist if you join the Marine Corps." And I was like, "No, it's going to be a good time, I swear." And so I was probably like 17 when I made the decision in high school, and it was really driven by like I just want to do the hardest thing for me. I wanted some structure in life, and yeah, I didn't choose an easy job. I was like, I want to go Marine Corps infantry. It sounds like a good time. So my recruiter was like, "Oh yeah, there's plenty of spots for that." So
Wonder why.
yeah, yeah, I joined in 2013 and I got out in 2018. So 5 years.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess during your time, people say you always remember the good times. Mostly, is there any specific worst thing or best thing about the Marine Corps you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably uniform across every veteran, but the friends you make, man, is like incomparable, right? You go through so much stuff together that those are bonds. Like I still talk to my boys all the time, even though we're all over the country. So I'd say the best thing is like the buddies that you make. Worst thing is you kind of have a lack of control over your life while you're in the Marine Corps. You know, like you can't really go and study and learn other things because there's not really a lot of time for that. And so um, I'd always encourage everybody to like push as much as you can to try to learn stuff outside of just your job if you have time.
Nice.
Definitely.
And it's interesting. I thought it was such a coincidence when we first met that you also happen to be part of Marine Corps Security Forces, and it's like a subsection out of the infantry. And it's so badass, right? The infantry has I think Eighth and I, like the silent drill platoon, is all infantry Marines that get plucked out of SOI, and then there's a security force little cohort.
Yeah,
How did you hear about security forces initially instead of
yeah.
just going straight for a yeah?
So yeah, my recruiter was like, "Hey, you'll be infantry, but you can like possibly guard the president." And I was like, "That's cool, you know." Like, like I've never been to DC. It'd be cool to like go guard the White House. That is not what I did at all. I'm guessing it's because I have like a Cuban background. I really don't know why I didn't get the clearance to go 8th and I. Um, but yeah, SOI was interesting because they were like, you know, I was a security force guy. Normally, you don't get selected to do anything other than be an 11. And so they asked the group of us, like, "Hey, who's good at math?" And I was like, "Oh, I was pretty good at math." They're like, "Cool, you're gonna go be a 51." And so I was like this unicorn of security forces grunt 51, which kind of set me up for failure when I hit the fleet because you don't do any like 51 stuff while you're at Bangor, Washington, you know. Um, but I just try to humble myself and like, how much can I learn from the guys around me? Because you come in as a corporal from security forces, and if you were a good dude, And then all of a sudden you're like, well, now you're a leader of 51s. And you're like, well, I've never led 51s. I haven't done demo or rockets in like 2 years at least. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting journey of like just constant imposter syndrome my whole career. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, kind of uh, just to stay on this chapter a little bit. Did you have to earn that respect over time, or did you have to like maybe learn from others and kind of humble yourself? You're coming in default NCO, you got that rank where people just have to give that respect, but you didn't have that kind of um, job experience
Right.
for that specific role. How did that dynamic play out?
Yeah, I when I hit the fleet, it was I mean, I was nervous, like anybody else. Super intimidated by everybody just getting run around by first sergeants all over the place. And so I literally went up to every guy in my squad and I shook their hands and I introduced myself and I told all the senior lance coolies like, yo, I'm here to learn from you for now, Teach me what you can so I can lead you. And they took that very well. It's like this guy's not coming in like he knows everything. And it's funny because we actually had another 0351 come in from security forces, which is crazy. He came in from Georgia, and he was the opposite. So I got to see like what happens on the other side of the spectrum because he came in like I'm a corporal. You're gonna do what I say,
Yeah, I
and he
hate
got
that.
zero respect, dude. Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's not the way to do it, man. We don't know this job. You got to kind of own up to it and like go study your manuals and figure out what your job is. But yeah, a lot of it was like, yeah, I was in charge at the time, but I was asking a lot of questions from everybody. Like, what do I do here? And, if I get smoked by somebody, then just pay the consequences.
Yeah,
Foreshadowing. I think that's a good attitude to have in tech as well. Just
Yeah,
being able to just ask questions and just learn from everyone around you.
totally, totally.
yeah. I feel like I've got like a million questions for your time in the Marine Corps. Just have that overlap with being O3s, but what made you want to get out of the Marine Corps?
Yeah, it's funny. I was on the edge of so being a 51, like you're pretty comfortable with demo, and I was like, oh, I could go like be EOD, like that'd be a cool assignment. It was like a 90 grand signing bonus at the time, which for us is like 3 years pay. Um, and so I put in like a like I wanted to go EOD. I told my command, but they were like, hey, it's going to be like a year and a half, and you're going to have to reenlist and go on another deployment. And I was like, nah, I don't know if I want to do all of this again and go to Oki, and it sounded kind of boring to me. And so my brother actually was doing web dev at the time, and he was like literally just building websites as a webmaster. And he was like, "Go check out Free Code Camp and see if you like this." And I built a cat website, and I was like, "This is the coolest thing ever! Like I can create things." It was so different from being a grunt. It was like being able to create things without having to hurt my body in the meantime. And I'd always
Yeah,
kind of been like nerdy, I loved like Tetris and computer games and played video games. And I was like, this seems like a cool path. And then I looked up starting salaries for software engineers and I was like, yeah, I should go do this. Yeah.
nice. And so it was kind of like your brother that was like the initial touch point, and you
Yeah.
kind of just start peeling the onions from there. Um, that's
What?
awesome.
That is pretty cool. What you said? Free code camp, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was like Code Academy, one of those like free ones.
Yeah. No, I definitely have used that. Recommend that for listeners as well. Is there any other resources you used besides that as you kind of started to get going and maybe before you got that first job?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I didn't just go from like free code camp to job. My intention was I had gone to I think it's TRS. Is that like the course that we do on our way out? And they
Transition
talked
readiness
about
service.
the skill bridge programs. And so MSSA was one of them at the time. So it's Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. And so it's essentially like, hey, you could take 6 months of your contract and go learn how to code. And so I looked up the program and they were like, oh, it's all C sharp and SQL. So it's like, I'm going to go learn C sharp because that's what the program does. And I ended up using a lot of Microsoft's free learning material. So there was this one teacher, Bob Tabor, that I used to just like, he was like my hero because he could teach me how to code and I would understand it. like took me so long to understand what an array was. I was like, what the heck is a variable? Like it makes no sense at all. And when you think about it now, you're like, oh, it's just kind of like another language in your brain. But yeah, I learned a lot from Microsoft's free material. They have so much online, and so he's actually now like an evangelist at Microsoft.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were kind of going through this, was there anything you felt was lacking or wasn't really available to you that you wish existed at the time?
Yeah, I did not have a mentor at all. Every other grunt around me thought I was nuts because I was on guard duty at the time because I had told them I was getting out. And so they just put me on like 51 area guard. And so I was like SOG.
51 area, baby.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just SOG, like literally reading coding books, not understanding
No
anything.
shit.
Yeah. And everybody around me is like, "You're nuts! Like you're a nerd." Even like staff sergeant is telling me like, "What are you doing, man?" Um, and so I really wish that I had a mentor that was like, "Hey, you can do this. Here's some material. Like, let's bounce ideas off of each other." And so like there was no real like vets in tech or anything like that to help you out. It was just you're on your own.
I definitely hear you. I feel like that's what I kind of said as far as what was lacking was just someone to talk to about
Yeah.
tech that was already in tech. Because again, no one I knew either was going into software engineering,
Yeah.
um, especially when none of us knew how to code.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess that's probably part of the reason also we're starting this podcast too. So hopefully people can reach out to you and us on here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is like phenomenal. I wish I would have had this podcast to listen to and like keep me motivated because outside of that, it was like I was going through a divorce at the time. It was like really tough, and I was like just trying to change my life, man. And I'm sure there's plenty of other vets or guys getting ready to get out that are going through tough times. Like you can flip it. Within a year, you'll be making six figures if you want to.
It's heavy stuff, man.
Yeah,
Um, I guess I want to tap into some like potential advice that you may have if you were to give to your younger self. Think back 2013, you're EAS and you're taking this like boot camp from Microsoft. It's Microsoft, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, what advice would you give to your younger self? I'm trying to break into this industry.
So I would totally have told myself pursue what you think is fun. So I spent so much time doing all these tutorials that I never finished and buying Udemy courses that I never did. Um, and I totally would have been like, what are you interested in? What do you like? What excites you? Because you'll go and want to build that and like want to come back to it the next day. Um, and that's what I do now. Is like even if my day job isn't as entertaining, I get to go and pursue my passion kind of in the evening or when I have time on the weekends. And so any like new aspiring dev, like go if you have an idea, try to build it, figure it out. And a lot of the times the tutorials don't help you as much as you like looking at documentation or just banging your head on the keyboard is so much more satisfying than getting the answer in front of you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And with
Um,
I was going to
yeah,
say
go.
with we kind of talked about what you used for the Microsoft Bootcamp and stuff. There's so many different things out there now with on YouTube or Udemy courses or boot camps where you go to college and get a computer science degree. I guess if you had to redo it, would you change anything or would you recommend a specific pathway this day and age?
Um, yeah, it's tough, man, because everybody's kind of on their own journey, and we all learn different ways. But I would say like explore it all. Like if you like school, you like the long form of education, like maybe go dive into that. If you learn quickly through projects, or you are more of like a theoretical learner, you want to go do like late code is fun for you, then go explore what is the most interesting at the time. Um, because yeah, I don't think there's one path that can help everybody, but definitely explore all the resources because what maybe helped me might not be what helps others. So yeah.
That's true.
Could you talk about how you got your first role in tech after leaving the Marine Corps? So you got done with this boot camp, and then yeah, talk to us about that first journey.
I'd say, I mean, I feel extremely lucky. The MSSA program at the time, they'd set you up with interviews with Microsoft at the end of the boot camp, and so it was like the luckiest thing I could have ever had. We do like an initial round at the end of the boot camp, kind of like maybe 2 weeks before graduation. Um, so someone comes down from Microsoft to San Diego, where my classroom was at the time. They give you like an initial behavioral interview. If that's like a pass on culture, then they literally flew up. Like there's 11 in my class. I think 10 of us went up to Microsoft and did 4 hours of interviews with a bunch of different teams, and it's all like leak code style questions. So like I had like maybe 4 months of coding experience, and it's like now you're solving leak code, mediums, which was insane to me. But that's literally all I had been trying to do because I figured like this is what an interview is like, so I'm just gonna try to do this. And I was lucky enough to get 2 offers from Microsoft at the time, which was mind blowing. I remember like tearing up on the way. My manager at the time for my first role, he had called me the next day, which is like it's not normal to do that. Normally it takes like a week or two for them to call you back. He called me the next day and he's like, "Hey man, I want you to come join Outlook if you'll come be with us." And I was like, yeah. And so I hung up and I was like tearing up on this train, getting ready to like go to the airport. It was wild, wild experience, but I think I was very lucky. That's not the normal path, right? You don't normally get set up with Microsoft because they have 5 walls of recruiters to get to. So I was very fortunate in that way. The first role is always the hardest, but after that, it gets a little easier.
Yeah. So talk to us about like what you did working with, and such an incredible story, by the way. So, um, yeah, I hope listeners gain inspiration from that. But yeah, talk to us about what work you've done on Outlook. If you can share any color on that.
Yeah, so I was on the Outlook team for about 4 years. So when I started out there, I was literally working on the mail app that comes inbox with Windows. So we have like, I think it was like 330 million users. So anything you change is a big deal, right? Like we're going to change this button color. We'll make sure that it's like accessible because we have blind users, like a very large percentage. Um, and so I started off like I will say, so I learned C sharp. The whole project was in C++ that was 15 years old and custom built by Microsoft. So I had no idea what the hell was going on anywhere. I didn't know what MVC was. I didn't know how to do a code review. I like nothing, man. And so my first like 3 months were just like figuring out like what to say at stand up, like I had no idea what was going on. And I remember my first day of work. I got there at 7:30 because I thought it was like kind of normal time to show up to work. And then the PM shows up at 8, and he's like, "Hey man, why are you here so early?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm used to formation at 6:30. Like I just got out of boots last week. I was still on terminal leave, like working at Microsoft." And he's like, "Your manager doesn't show up till 10, so just sleep in." And so that was like my first introduction to culture in tech. And yeah, it was just like my manager was like, "Don't set your computer on fire for the first 6 months and you're good." And I was like, "Okay, thanks." I don't think most companies are like that. I think it's big tech, so they're kind of used to a slower pace. Um, but I was lucky enough that I think it was maybe like 5 months into that role. So I was starting to get a hang of C++ and figure out what pointers were. And, it was like everything's new to me, coding's new. And we switched, the whole team was like, "Hey, we're going to write this project in React Native for Windows." And so React Native was new and it had never been translated to Windows, right? React Native is normally just like mobile, iOS and Android only. And so I got to be part of this like revolution of rewriting the open source repo of React Native and writing React, which none of my team knew. So I got so lucky that we all started from zero, and I learned React super early in my career. And we worked on that project for maybe a year before they were like, "Hey, this isn't going to work. Everything's going to web." And so they moved us all to Outlook Web, which is written in React. So it was a pretty easy transition from React Native to React. And then I was on web for 2 years before I joined my first startup. So yeah, React and TypeScript is way easier than C++ at the time. So yeah,
Now, for the user or for the listeners, obviously, so there's this thing called FANG companies, right? Which is, I know some names have changed since recently, but usually it stands for what? Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, just the largest tech companies. Microsoft is in there as well. There's different Mang, whatever. Um, you mentioned you went to startups, but before we get there, can you kind of give a typical day in the life for someone who may want to work at a FANG company? I know you mentioned some times and daily stand up, just what
Yeah,
it normally looks like, how things get done.
yeah. I mean, it can vary from team to team, but it's honestly, I mean, it's pretty awesome. Do you, as far as like work life balance goes, there Microsoft is well known for having a good work life balance, meaning that you don't work super long hours. Like a 40-hour work week's pretty normal. A 30-hour work week is pretty normal. So stand ups normally at like 10 or 11 a.m. You give a quick update on what you're working on. That happens daily. And you might have meetings throughout the week with maybe a project manager to discuss a feature you're working on. But most of the time, you're just left alone to do your work. And so if you're working remotely, there's nobody to keep you accountable to do your work. You just kind of have to do it. And it shows in the amount of output that you have. And so that's really what you're evaluated on is the kind of features that you're creating at a big tech company. And so when you do work somewhere as big as Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon, you get very small chunks of, and even smaller chunk of what is Outlook. So when you think about me working on Outlook calendar, so Outlook is mail and calendar, these two massive projects, like literally millions of lines of code. Then I will work on, let's say, my whole team of 6 engineers is working on how to create a new event, right? And so literally just this one pop up, and then I might be working on, you know, grabbing some new data for this button to think about when you click on creating a new event, whether that's availability or scheduling or maybe the color if you want to customize your calendar. So typically in a massive company like that, you're working on the tiniest piece of this monstrosity of a project. So, and that will take up, you'll have that project for 2 weeks. Like, go change the color on this thing. And it sounds like
Yeah.
so simple, right? Because you could just do it. But you have to make sure that you're doing it the exact way and write perfect tests. And then it goes through like 4 waves of test users before it ever hits like a normal public consumer. So I might have changed that color and now it'll be, if I change it in January, Jamil wouldn't see it until May that I made that change because it has to go through all these waves of testers before it ever gets anywhere. And if something doesn't work on the way, they'll kick it back to you and then it'll be another, 4 months of waves. So yeah, it's kind of.
Jeez. So, what ultimately made you decide to leave Microsoft?
Yeah. So I guess a little secret. I was working. I've always kind of been like the entrepreneurial mindset. So at the time while I was at Microsoft, I was renovating my basement. So during COVID, so I was there from 2018 to 2022. I've left Microsoft Redmond area, so up in Washington. When COVID happened, everything went remote, and so I moved out to Colorado because my manager was like, "We're not going to office for a long, long time, so just live wherever you want." Um, so I moved to Colorado Springs, where I'm at now, and we bought a house, and so my basement was like wrecked. I had to redo everything, and I needed a tile saw, and I didn't want to go buy one from Home Depot, and renting one was like $130 a day. So I was like, I could just buy one, and eventually it'd be cheaper anyways. So I had an idea of like, why can't you just rent tools from people? Like my neighbor might have a tile saw and he might want to rent it for $20 a day to me. And so I looked up technology, like, does this exist right now? And there was one project called Spare Tools with a Z that existed at the time. And I literally cold emailed the email I saw on the website and I was like, hey man, I just had the same idea as this project that you created. Do you need help? Um, and he messaged me back and he was like, I had an offshore team build this thing for me, but I don't have any devs maintaining it. Like, if you want to come on and work on it, sure. And so that was like kind of my first taste at owning a project. He just gave me free reign to do whatever I wanted. So I had to go in there and update a bunch of packages. And I realized how much fun that was. That was up till like 1, 2 o'clock, like most nights working on this thing outside of work hours. And it was just so much fun to be able to touch things and not really worry about like the whole testing process or when is this ever going to get out. Like I could literally fix it that day and then submit it to Apple the next day. And so that's really what drove me to think about leaving Microsoft. Was I love the security blanket that they provided, but I didn't feel like I was advancing my career as much as I could have been.
Gotcha. Yeah, you kind of mentioned some differences there between, big tech, that's what they call it, and
Yeah,
maybe a startup type company. Is there anything else besides the how long it takes to release something, right? You can work on it tonight and it'll be released to us tonight, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
is there anything else you found that you enjoyed more in startup land than big tech?
Yeah, I mean, there's this ability, I guess, kind of demand to wear every hat that you can while you're at a startup. So you might be engineer number one, but you're also a PM at the same time because you have to manage your own tasks. And you also might be a bit of a designer because the designer didn't get to that feature you're working on. And the involvement in the process of developing a project was kind of addicting to me. Like I liked having this full context of what was happening. When you're at a big tech company, it just all comes top down. Like VP says he wants to build this thing, and then that comes down to the general manager who's in charge of managers, and then it goes to your manager, and then it comes down to you eventually, right? That might take months as well. So there's this unique ability to go from I have this idea and go build it within 20-minute conversation with the CEO or CTO, whoever it was. And so yeah, it's just everything moves so fast, and with that comes downfalls too. You make a ton of mistakes, but you also learn a lot faster because you're making those mistakes. So that's probably one of the biggest differences that I found between big tech and startups was it's so agile. You can do kind of whatever you want as long as it's within the frame of the project that you're working on.
And with those, I guess, question someone might have after that is the hours, right? So you kind of wear more roles in the startup. You have maybe more things you touch. Do the hours change, and is it kind of more secure, job wise, pay wise, to be at big tech versus startup?
Oh, totally, totally. Yeah. Startups are volatile, of course, right? Because they're new projects. And the hours may vary from startup to startup. It's like the culture can be kind of wild. But the first startup I worked at, I was probably working from like 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every night, which is not making my wife and son very happy. But with that came a ton of learning. So there's some pros, but it was mostly con as far as work hours goes. So that's where the work life balance goes out of the window. My benefits were not the same, right? I didn't have Microsoft insurance anymore. My pay was not the same. I didn't have stock that Microsoft provides that I can sell, right? Because they're a public company. And so, yeah, they promise you this upfront equity of like, I think 1% at my first startup, which is pretty massive for a startup equity. Um, but that could just be nothing because the startup might not go anywhere. And so there's definitely a ton of risk involved to joining a startup. And that startup, actually, I just got an email that they went down yesterday. So they're like no longer a business. And that is very possible. If you're still at that startup, like now you're getting laid off and you're back on the market with no security blanket. Whereas at a big tech company, it takes a long time for you to get fired. And Microsoft's not going anywhere. They're not going to run out of money. Um, and so, yeah, that's huge. And you can easily get, let go the next day if for some reason the founders, want to save money for something.
Um, Sweet man. I want to kind of jump into a similar question we asked at the beginning, where we asked about your like favorite and worst parts about the Marine Corps. You know, bringing it back to tech, what would you say are the best parts and worst parts about it?
Yeah, yeah. I'd say, I mean, my favorite part about tech is just this ability to create. You can just build anything if you know enough. And if you don't know, you can go, I mean, there's so many resources. I can go watch a YouTube video on iOS development and build an iOS app. So it's kind of addicting to be able to just build on any idea that you've ever had. I mean, the world is run by tech nowadays. I'd say the worst part, and maybe personally, is that I sit at my desk a long time, like all day long, and I have to be really intentional about keeping up with my health. And so that's probably the hardest thing for me is there's nobody's going to make you PT, nobody's going to keep you in shape. There's plenty of um, opportunity for you to just sit at your desk and do more work if you want to. You don't have to go outside ever. So um, that's probably the hardest part for me. Other than that, there's a lot of different cultural aspects to working in tech, right? They tend to lean a certain way when you're at a tech company. And so you have to be very mindful of, making sure that you assimilate with that environment. And so it might not be exactly who you are. Whereas in the military, everybody is themselves all the time. It doesn't matter. Um, and so that's also was kind of a big transition for me coming into tech was like, you kind of have to wear your work mask and that's okay. Everybody does it. So yeah. Yeah.
And I guess before we hop off the your tech role stuff, we talked a little bit about kind of day in the life at Microsoft and specific roles you were in. You were in a few different startup roles, even co-founder of some of these. Can you go a little more in depth of what some of these companies are, day in the life, what
Yeah.
you've done there?
Yeah, totally. So the first startup I mentioned, where I was working those late hours, called Jam, and say they were actually kind of like a podcast startup as well. So they would create these short form kind of like sound bites, and they build you out a playlist, and then you could send it to yourself at any time of the day. So every morning at 8 a.m., I'd get this small playlist while I'm brushing my teeth that I could listen to different news about tech or like beekeeping or all these random topics, news, whatever it was. So it's a really cool idea to me and very foreign because I'd never worked in the audio space before. So that was my first startup. I was there for about 8 months. And it was a great experience. I was the first engineering hire, and I actually got to teach the CTO who had been a VP at LinkedIn, VP of engineering at LinkedIn. And so he taught me a ton about leadership and tech, and I was teaching him some React at the same time because he didn't know React. He'd not been coding for a long time when you get that high up. Um, but the work hours were not great, as I mentioned, and so eventually I had to leave, and I joined a startup called Pathmatch, which was essentially like LinkedIn for Gen Z. So they would try to take all of your college experience and internships and build this beautiful profile. And then on the other side, there was a recruiter product that would try to match what the recruiter was looking for with the skills that these students had to try to find them entry level roles. So it was a pretty good idea. The CEO had been in recruiting for 20 years, and so she had a lot of experience around that subject. Um, but it wasn't the best tech leadership because it's really hard to lead a tech company when you've never really been in tech. And so I joined initially as a founding engineer and then eventually was the head of engineering at that company. So I was leading a team. I think at our biggest was 9 engineers and then eventually dwindled down as we ran out of money, which just happened, I think, last year. Um, so yeah, that role was really cool to be able to flex some of my like Marine Corps leadership skills, but in this tech environment. So a lot of what I took from the Marine Corps was, if you care about your guys, they're going to perform for you, and that carries on pretty well into tech. If you care about people's tech careers and what they want to do, they're going to perform the tasks that you want them to do. Um, and so I had a great time leading engineers and doing engineering myself. A lot of the infrastructure decisions were foreign to me, but you just do the research, you can test things out. At a startup, it's so flexible. Like we want to change, this new styling tool that we want to use. Like we went from using Chakra UI to Tailwind because I was like, I think Tailwind is a better decision here, so let's start using it, and it worked out really well. Um, so that was super unique to have that kind of power and like be able to apply it directly and see users like are happy with, oh, now we have this new mobile experience because of Tailwind. So that was extremely intimidating, but also really gratifying to be able to grow a product with not just what I'm building, but what other people are building as well.
That's awesome. And I guess with these startups, so this is, I guess, for me, someone like me who knows how to code, works at a very large company, but at the end of the day, my interest really is in startups as well, and trying to create my own startup. What kind of tips or advice would you give to someone who's you know keeps kind of saying they want to do it and just hasn't done the leap yet? I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so there's a website out there called Well Found, and so it is essentially the job board for startups. And so what I was doing for a while was like just trying to find a project that I was interested in before I applied. And so a lot of them, I mean, startups can pay pretty well, which is nice. There's not, a lot of backing to the equity that they offer, so you have to be very mindful of that. Like, don't get big eyes when they give you, you own 200,000 shares of this company. Like it could be nothing, right? So just find projects that interest you, and you have to be super specific on the culture because the culture at a startup matters a lot more than it does at a giant company. The CEO could drive you crazy, or you'd have teammates, and there's literally nobody else you could go to. You can't really switch teams across the company. You are the team, and so you have to be really mindful about during interviews, like, am I going to love working with this person? And if not, then I'd probably like, let's move on to the next startup. And you have to ask a ton of good questions about, what does their runway look like? Do they have enough money to keep us up for 3 years if we don't make any money? What is the annual recurring revenue? You get a lot more like businessy because it matters a lot more. If this business isn't doing well, I could have no job in 6 months. So
That makes sense. And I know you mentioned you kind of co-founded a startup app.
yeah,
As someone who kind of wants to dive into that world, um, and maybe not work for a company or a startup and just want to start their own thing, is there anything specific you would do?
yeah, totally. I mean, so right now I'm starting this app called Skiva, and it's essentially like Strava for pickleball. So if you guys haven't used Strava in the past, it's like a digital community slash like data analytics for your workout data. And so this Strava has this really rich environment that gives you a bunch of different insights on like how your running is doing, gives you these beautiful maps. And they do a really good job at facilitating a community. So I go on a run, and then I come back, I log it on my watch, and then someone gives me a kudos, and I get this like little rush of, endorphins. Like, oh, somebody liked my run, I feel acknowledged for that. A lot of people will say like, if you don't log your run, it doesn't count, which is like hilarious. But it's because we kind of want that uplifting kudos, and so I'm building a similar product, but for the pickleball community. Pickleball is super social sport. Everybody's really kind, and there's no place for you to kind of have that digital community outside of the friends that you play with. And so I would say if you are looking for starting your own idea, like find a gap in something that you're interested in and then just start attacking it. I literally was like, I'm going to start this app today. And then I like opened up Expose, like install process, and I'm going to start a new project. Okay, what back am I going to use? Like, I don't know. Let's just go figure it out. Like, so right now I'm using convex.dev. If you guys haven't heard of it, super cool technology. Skiva actually just got accepted into their startup program, which is really cool. We get like 6 months of free resources. So shout out to Convex. Um, but yeah, I just get started, man. The things will come over time. Like start building it and then talk about it to people, talk about it to your dev buddies. Like I have a good friend that I've been coding with for about 4 years, and he was the one that taught me how to play pickleball. And so I was like, "Hey man, do you want to work on this with me?" And he was like, "Sure." Like I was like, "Eventually we'll figure out what equity looks like, but it doesn't really matter until this thing is something that's worth that has value at all." And so I would say just jump in, start building, and the designs will come later. Don't be critical of yourself. I have zero tests on my project right now, and I'm kind of okay with that. So like I have it on test flight, and I'll play with it, and if it breaks, like I can just go fix it like 20 minutes later, and I'll have a new build out. So That was kind of some of my biggest learnings from startups is nobody really knows what they're doing. So you have to just go and figure it out. And eventually, if it's a good enough need for people, if you're satisfying a problem, it will grow kind of organically and naturally.
Gotcha. So for everyone listening, find a problem, solve it, and just start building it today.
Start building. Yeah, yeah. And it might fail, and that's okay. You're going to learn a ton from even trying. But if you don't try, like, dude, there's so many ideas I've had where I'm like, oh, this sounds really cool. Like, what if we did like AI food reviews, And like, sure, that might be a really cool idea. But if I don't go and try it, like, I'll never know. I don't know how many times I've had conversations with people and they have this idea and I'm like, that sounds awesome, definitely going to be a thing, and they just don't take action. So you just go start, and make a little bit of progress every day, and it might be something, it might not, but if you just did an extra 100 hours of coding over the last year trying to build your thing, like, that's 100 hours towards making you a better engineer. So
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great advice. I'll just start building something.
yeah, yeah,
And you mentioned
Motivated.
AI in there as well. So I mean, kind of have to ask the question everyone's
yeah.
asking these days of, do you think AI will kind of take over coding jobs, or what do you think the kind of future looks like? Obviously, no one knows, but
Yeah, yeah. It's something I think about a lot. So I use ChatGPT every single day. During work, I use Copilot and VS Code. So I'm a big fan of AI, and I have used it enough to know that it's not ready to take my job now. Still makes a ton of mistakes, and can't really wrap its head around large pieces of logic. But I do think eventually it will get to a place where it could build something simple, at least, or be able to iterate. And whether it will take my job or not, I think that's kind of part of the reason why I want to start my own company, is because then it is a tool for me to use instead of something that's replacing me. I want to be the orchestrator and not the worker. Um, I'll give it like 10 years before it actually, like, hire a senior engineer that's AI. Because sure, you could probably build like a junior or even like an intern level AI. Um, but there's a lot more that we do outside of just coding, man. We do a lot of thinking and research, and we try to, like, build in business logic, which is not always easy to communicate. Like, we have PMs that's their whole job is to think about business logic. So you're trying to replace everybody. That's tough. That's tough. And it's not good at design either. I've tried. So
I agree. Yeah.
Um, Tying it back to the Marine Corps a little bit, you mentioned that you had used SkillBridge.
yeah,
Is that right? I recently heard on Marine Corps Times that I guess the Marine Corps is like cutting the SkillBridge program a bit short. I'm not sure if you heard about that, but um, for potentially any like transitioning service member or active duty person that's listening, and with SkillBridge being cut short, what do you think they can do to kind of get ahead of that, kind of get exposed? Because it seems like tech is sometimes out of sight, out of mind, especially for infantrymen
yeah,
or ground level MOSs. We're kind of being shown like a career in like law enforcement or um, yeah, I don't know, something
yeah,
else,
yeah.
but
I mean, that's normally what it is, right? Like, you can be a cop or a firefighter.
yeah,
So
yeah. So yeah, do you got anything that you think that can kind of like break that bubble
yeah,
and have tech penetrate and get more eyes, especially with the ground level MOSs out there?
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't shun away a CS degree. I mean, there's a ton of gaps that you have, even if you do a coding boot camp. Like, you don't really understand data structures and algorithms. You don't really understand like what's happening under the hood. And so, if I hadn't had a skill bridge program to go and use, I would have pursued a CS degree, and I did even after. Like, I finished my CS degree while I was at Microsoft, just because I knew there was gaps there. And I wouldn't shun. any of these resources that are out there. So if you learn how to build an Android app using, Coursera or something like that, and then you go and launch it, that's super impressive to any recruiter that you've done something like that. Most devs don't have like public projects that they can point to. From what I've seen, I've interviewed engineers, and a lot of them don't have great portfolios. Like, just go and show yourself to the world. Be public and open about what you're building on LinkedIn. Like, people love that stuff, and I've tried to push myself. Like, be public about what you're building. Don't be afraid to show. Like, I don't really know how to code, but I'm learning, and I think people find that super impressive. Like, if you're willing to both shine your personality, like a lot of service members were good at talking to leadership and to each other. It's just natural, and that's what we have to do every day. And that is rare in the tech community. Most engineers do not want to be leaders. They just want to be ICs forever. IC being individual contributor, right? They just want to code. Um, we as vets have a ton of opportunity to go and lead engineers or go be a PM and be a technical PM. Like, some code, you can lead a project, and that can always funnel you towards, whatever position that you want to. So being in tech isn't just being a software engineer. There's tons of opportunity out there. So you might pursue it via, you want to go to college, like, go for it. Use your GI Bill. I feel like everybody should do that. I'm going to pursue a master's degree because I have GI Bill left. Um, or there's coding boot camps that take the GI Bill. Like, go and try to learn Java if that's the language that coding boot camp does. Like I said, go pursue a personal interest if you want to build something. I think that even without the Skill Bridge program, I would have tried to go and learn no matter what. I probably would have learned JavaScript because it was like the easiest thing at the time, instead of C sharp, because I was like, what is object oriented programming? This is insane. Um, but yeah. I mean, I'm sad that the military, the VAs decided to cut those programs. I had a buddy who's actually he's an investigator in the LAPD, and he was like, "Dude, I want to transition into tech. Like, you make really good money. I have kids. I don't want to be gone all the time." And so he got accepted into the vet tech program, and then they cut it. And so now he's kind of like, "What do I do?" There's no straight resource. And so I've been pushing him towards things like Treehouse or, Free Code Camp, Code Academy. But I know it's hard to be like, there's no structure or curriculum to follow. And so I've told him, like, maybe you should go pursue like an associate's to start, see if you like that. And yeah, it's tough and it's a bummer.
Yeah, someone who used vet tech for my coding boot camp and stuff like that definitely stinks that that program has been cut for now. Hopefully they bring it back.
Yeah.
And one other thing you touched on was kind of sharing what you're working on, which reminded me of something. There's this whole movement called Build in Public.
Yep.
So if you go on Twitter, aka now X, and you look up the hashtag Build in Public, you can find a bunch of people that are just building stuff and sharing it on Twitter and doing daily updates on just what they're working on, getting feedback from different users. So I would recommend you go on there. Just if you don't have an account, just create one. Follow a bunch of startup companies. Follow a bunch of the engineers that work at those companies. Follow the hashtag Build in Public, and then maybe you start sharing on there as well, and just kind of and doing that. And that's kind of a way to just learn a little bit, see what they're doing.
Yeah, totally, man. I think is something I've done in my career too is I like cold email people all the time, or like LinkedIn cold message, meaning like I don't know this person, I will just send them a message and say like, "Do you need help on this thing?" And most people will take that as like, "Huh, maybe I do need help on something." Like, it doesn't, whatever it is. Like, I'm not asking for money, especially if you're like active duty or you just transitioned out and you have some leeway to like, I don't have to make a ton of cash right now. um, just go like give your services for free, and that will can eventually evolve into a paid position. And I know that's probably kind of counterintuitive, like we all want the big salaries, um, but you will learn so much from like kind of just being under somebody else that is teaching you. And yeah, now you get to put that thing on your resume, like, I contributed to this project. Even if it was for free, it doesn't matter, it's still good experience. So
Nice. Um, I got one last question about the Marine Corps before we close things off. You were thinking about doing a reenlistment. You mentioned EOD. Did you ever think about a B billet, like a drill instructor billet?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny. I wasn't. I don't know, man. I feel like the Marine Corps is all about like the best leaders are the ones that yell the most. And I was like not that leader at all. I was like super soft spoken, and I would, super caring about my guys. I did not like love yelling at junior Marines. So drill instructor was definitely not for me. But I had considered like maybe being a recruiter. Like that sounds chill. From what I've heard, it's not chill to be a recruiter. It kind of sucks making quotas. And I was like, maybe SOI instructor would be sweet, or like, working at Bridgeport, like I got to do Winter Mountain Leaders, like super fun
Nice.
course. They just ski for fun. Um, so totally, I think, MSG would have been dope, but I was married at the time, so it wasn't really like a thing. But I think if I could have, I probably MSG because that sounds like the most fun. Like, let's go live in Argentina for a year, and you have like your own private
Yeah,
driver and good food.
definitely, man.
Yeah.
Um, well, good deal, man. Appreciate you coming on. We're gonna post Jeff's LinkedIn and some of the other information um, on the show description here. Do you want to plug anything on your end, Jeff?
Yeah, totally. So I'm building this app, like I mentioned, for pickleball. It's called Skiva. So Skiva. So you can look it up, skiva.app. If anybody wants to reach out and they want to help, I need help. I'm just trying to build this thing with one of my buddies and my brother, who's a cybersecurity guy, so knows nothing about coding. So I'm always willing to teach. And yeah, hopefully it becomes a thing and I get to hire a team of vet engineers. Would be badass. But yeah, that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, other than that, yeah, it was awesome. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for being on here, Jeff. I think you definitely provided some great info our listeners can kind of learn from as they are either try to transition into tech or continue in tech. And as you know, we'll plug all of our social media for Fallen Tech in the description. Thanks for joining.